A plan to expand the Texas power grid now on hold.
A central question remains unresolved, whether the underlying reliability need truly requires large-scale imports of power over long distances.
Why regulators are hitting pause on plans for a huge transmission line project and what they're waiting on before moving forward.
And it also really illustrated the total chaos.
Dissecting a deadly day, lawmakers review the final report on the flood that killed girls at Camp Mystic, what they say needs to change to prevent another tragedy. A major moment for Texas Republicans, we look at the message from the GOP convention and the challenge of turning party priorities into votes in November.
Produced from the Capitol in Austin and airing statewide, this is the award-winning State of Texas.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Dylan McKim, filling in for Josh Hinkle. A key decision in a plan to build new electric transmission lines is now on hold. On Wednesday, the Public Utility Commission considered whether to approve a proposed route near Midland. The project, with power lines mounted on towers nearly 200 feet tall, has seen major pushback from landowners. Now, a challenge is causing a delay. Eric Henrikson takes a closer look at the drama.
Amid tears,
We've worked hard all of our lives out there. It means the world to us, that ranch.
and frustration,
I feel the landowner is pretty low on the totem pole.
a decision delayed.
I think the best thing to do for us would be to abate this case.
Commissioners ultimately put the case on hold. Wednesday's hearing covered one section of the transmission line project, connecting power south of Big Spring to north of Pecos. It's one of 5 proposed 765 kilovolt transmission projects moving through the state's approval process. Attorneys with nonprofit American Stewards of Liberty argued a final decision on this route could not be decided yet, not until commissioners consider similar questions in another pending 765 kilovolt case.
The central question remains unresolved, whether the underlying reliability need truly requires large-scale imports of power over long distances, or whether local generation alternatives could satisfy some portion of that need.
Encore, the utility responsible for the project, said that each section of the project should be handled separately, arguing each project provides different benefits,
These are separate and discrete projects.
while also saying that delaying a decision would ignore a 180-day timeline put in place by state lawmakers and the law that authorized the project.
The 180-day schedule is extremely fast in these type of cases.
Following the decision to delay, Encore told KXAN in a statement that they appreciate the commissioner's review of the project and will continue to participate in the review process, while the American Stewards of Liberty said the decision was a step in the right direction.
We understand that Texas has to upgrade its grid. We're not standing in the way of progress. All we ask is that you choose a better path when that option exists.
Eric joins us now. Eric, thanks so much for being on the show with us.
Of course.
And you've been at these meetings, you've met the landowners. What's really driving this intense pushback?
For many of the landowners, they've had this land for decades, if not almost 100 years for some. There was one landowner I saw, her ranch was in her family for 85 years. Her parents live on the property, her siblings live on the property. This is a thing where people have been living in these areas for decades, and all of a sudden this land could be taken up by these transmission lines that are, again, 200 feet tall. These are very, very tall lines. This could disrupt views. I spoke to one woman who it will be within 200 feet of her front door, 50 feet to the right-of-way, and then the center of the lines will be about 200 feet. That's pretty close to your front door for a transmission line. Now, again, these are proposed routes, so they're trying to fight the individual proposals. But for these people, this is a big disruption in their lives.
Well, you talk about the landowners seem united in their basically they're united in their pushback against the lines. But you talked about the process by which they are challenging can actually pit neighbor against neighbor.
So the way this works is you're not allowed to say, I don't want these power lines, these transmission lines. What you can say is, I don't want them moving through my property. Like, you can't fight the lines in general, you can fight the route, and you can only fight for yourself. You're not allowed to fight for your next door neighbor or for your community. It is an individual battle for each landowner. And that's part of the complication. Every single fight is an individual fight. You can't do an overall battle against this whole, proposal.
Yeah, well, we've talked about the energy needs and demand here in Texas. We have all this talk of data centers coming in. Supporters will say that these transmission lines, they're a critical need for Texas. How are those supporters making that case, and are they successful in making this case?
The big argument is there was a House bill a few years ago that argued they need this power in these areas. And it's not just for data centers, it's for oil and gas in the region. It's for all the resources during the next winter storm that might be needed. So there's a few reasons that they're using to back up their case. And what's interesting is some of the landowners I spoke to and I've seen talk have said, hey, we're not against that. We're not against that. You need that power. It's necessary for the growth of Texas. We just don't want it going through the middle of our yard.
And we're not just hearing landowners, of course, who are upset about this, but we've also heard a bipartisan push from lawmakers who are against this. What are they saying about these power lines?
The big concern they have is that the original House bill they put forward, the plan they had for that is not being met. It is too rushed. The process is far too rushed. This is only on over a 180-day period, which is a big concern for both the landowners and the lawmakers. This is a process that used to take a year, and they've compressed it to 180 days. So over 40 lawmakers, all Republican, in the last week have released a support of a motion to pause this process while it's going on, in hopes that we can actually take a closer look at, hey, should we really be doing this right now? And is it meeting the requirements we set forth when we put this plan into action a couple years ago?
Is there any chance that that letter has teeth? Do you know?
Kind of, yeah, a little bit. Like the motion did go through this week and caused this most recent hearing to go on pause. So with that on pause, it looks like it is causing some traction to occur. There's enough pushback to say, hey, maybe we are rushing this. But the 180 days that was laid forth to get this process done, it's law. And they're having a hard time pushing against that specific part.
Interesting. I know a lot of eyes will be on this story. You'll continue following it for us. Eric, thank you so much for joining us.
Nobody had any idea what they needed to be doing.
Investigators unveiled their final report on the failures amid the flood that killed 25 girls and 2 counselors at Camp Mystic, how lawmakers are responding to the report, and what comes next. A debate at the Capitol over how to stop the screwworm. A hearing raises questions about a controversial approach to fight the parasite. From platform votes to political strategy, we examine the impact of the Republican State Convention and what to watch in the aftermath. State investigators issued a final report Thursday on last summer's deadly flood at Camp Mystic. 25 girls and 2 teenage counselors died at the camp along the Guadalupe River. A joint investigative committee of Texas lawmakers approved the report during a Thursday hearing. The report detailed a series of failures that investigators say led to the tragedy. Kevin Baskar breaks down the key findings from that report.
A series of failures, that's how investigators described what happened at Camp Mystic the night of July 4th.
They had absolutely no assignments, no instructions, no training.
The report draws 4 main conclusions about the camp. First, it did not have a proper emergency plan.
Camp Mystic was required to have a written emergency plan posted in each cabin with procedures for evacuation of each cabin. There were no evacuation procedures in Camp Mystic's posted emergency plans.
Second, the camp didn't do enough to be prepared.
Weather updates were all publicly available. Camp Mystic had the means to inform itself and to appropriately protect its campers from severe weather.
Third, people didn't get evacuated in time. According to investigators, a flash flood warning was issued at 1:14 a.m., and by around 3 a.m., water was already covering roads near cabins.
If all campers had been instructed to evacuate their cabins by foot at this time, there was ample time and opportunity for all of them to safely reach higher ground.
And the fourth conclusion the report reached, communication with families after the flood was disorganized.
The parents of the campers were unnecessarily traumatized by the delivery of incomplete and conflicting information while they waited to learn whether their loved ones had survived.
Lawmakers unanimously adopted the report, but said there's more work still needed to be done.
This is the best report to date of what happened and what we can do going forward. but I do want to encourage the committee that this task is not done.
Kevin Baskar, State of Texas.
During last summer's special session, lawmakers passed legislation aimed at preventing future flood deaths. That includes creating new regulations to require camps to adopt emergency plans, including training for staff. Lawmakers also prohibited camps from having cabins in the floodplain, and they created a grant program to help cities, counties, and other governmental entities install warning sirens. Camp Mystic will not open to campers this summer. After legal challenges and pressure from political leaders, camp leaders withdrew their application to renew their license to operate for this season. Republicans set the tone for the campaign at their convention, but with the party's direction on display, some nominees aren't embracing everything in the platform. Lawmakers hear plans to stop the screwworm in Texas. After a hearing at the Capitol, we look at the options facing officials. After months of primary battles, Texas Republicans are turning their attention to November and staking out where the party stands. At the party's state convention in Houston, party leaders and activists laid out their priorities. But conventions are not just about platforms. They're about momentum and messaging as candidates prepare for the general election. So what does it all mean for the races ahead? And how will those priorities play with voters across Texas? Adam Schwager now joins us. We covered this event in Houston, and I first want to talk about our experience with the platforms, that the platform that the party left the convention with. There were two things, really two issues, key issues in here that they were talking about. A conversation about in vitro fertilization that was happening on the floor with delegates, whether or not the party wanted to ban IVF treatment or leave it as a legal form of getting pregnant here in Texas. And also there was talk about doing more with abortion laws.
Yeah, so it's interesting to know how the process works. So they had this proposed language, and then on the last day, people could propose amendments to the language. So this was all under the pro-life plank of the party and the specific language inside of there. And as you mentioned, one of the specific languages in that plank is explicit opposition to IVF. Now, those who are on the pro-life side say that the process destroys lots of viable embryos, and that if you believe life begins at conception, you can only think of this as abortion on really an industrial scale. But this is a break from a lot of people in the Republican Party. Ted Cruz co-sponsored a bill in 2024 to possibly take away funding for states who ban this procedure. I don't believe that bill passed, but he's thrown in that support. Ken Paxton, when the Texas Tribune reached out to him this week to ask him where he stands, he says he does support IVF. And I think most importantly, this goes against what the Trump administration has done, issuing an executive order very quickly after he got back into office last year, saying he wants to support IVF. Now, on the other abortion issue that you talked about, this has been a debate that's been happening over the last 10 years here on this equal protection issue. And what the equal protection language would do is, I was talking to people who are on the side of inserting that language, which did get finally placed in there. One of the things that it would do is put teeth in terms of abortion procedures when it comes to the women. So they say that right now a lot of abortions are being done in a handmade fashion, whether it's taking mifepristone or some other abortion-inducing drugs, and that there is no legal liability for the woman who is performing an abortion on themselves. The Texas GOP, despite a little back and forth, reaffirmed that yes, we want some form of punishment that can be levied on a woman who induces an abortion on herself.
And these conversations too, like there was jeers, boos, cheers even. It was a hot topic issue in there.
Right, because there was, women who have had, their own children through this procedure, and it's very personal to them.
That's right. And you talk about the platforms, that's sort of one aspect that we were there watching, but also the other aspect of seeing the Republican leaders, the state leaders, getting out there to have sort of their speeches.
Right. They had their unity message. I mean, what did you take away from those speeches?
Well, what's interesting, I think one of the things that sticks out to me, again, we heard from, the best of the best in the party there. Governor Greg Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, Speaker of the House Dustin Burrows, and of course their Senate candidate, Attorney General Ken Paxton. Something that we've always talked about that we find interesting is the unity message is really, yes, it's after the Democratic Party, but most importantly, it's after James Tallarico, who is considered the biggest threat against Republicans and their way of life here in Texas. It's about getting the party united after a pretty rough and tumble primary season between John Cornyn and Ken Paxton, where you really saw the party split there. And it was interesting. Dan Patrick's speech was probably caught the most headlines out of all the speakers over the weekend. For one, saying that James Tallarico was probably going to hell for his blasphemous interpretation of the Bible and the way he speaks about the Bible in his campaign, but also sort of calling out two very staunch and established Republicans, Sid Miller, the Agriculture Commissioner, and U.S. Senator John Cornyn, for kind of saying that they were abandoning the party because they were sore losers. They lost their primary runoffs. Now, I think Sid Miller and Dan Patrick have patched things up since then, but it was very interesting to see Dan Patrick call them out and sort of say, hey, Republicans, get in line. We have an extreme threat against us in this James Tallarico, and we need you to come out and vote in November. So I thought that was sort of my big takeaways. Going back to, we talk about the platform, but also there was the legislative priorities that the party sort of gives their stamp of approval was 15 items where they're telling lawmakers for the 90th session, this is what we want you to get done when we elect you back into office and you get back into power in Austin. Can you talk to us, what were the top issues on that priority list?
So the number one issue on that priority list was securing Texas elections. And I think, we've seen a long string of that coming out of that 2020 election. I think especially in the camps of people who do go to these conventions, there's still a lot of doubt in their minds about how secure, maybe not the Texas election was, but just the elections across states as they, did temporary rules because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think that was one of the big issues that they're still trying to drive home. And that second one aligns with something the governor has been talking about for almost his entire tenure in this role, which is trying to eliminate property taxes. Obviously, his goal right now is to eliminate school ISD property taxes. This one is to, a bold elimination of property taxes in general. But that's something you hear all the time going into these Republican circles. It's one of the big ticket issues. It
was a fascinating convention. We have the Democratic convention coming up this week. We'll be there. We're told 2,000 candidates across the state of Texas, all the way from the school board up to the Senate candidate, James Tallarico. So we'll be exciting. We'll bring updates to our viewers on air and online here. But Adam, thanks again. We'll see you in Corpus.
Thank you so much.
New questions in the fight to stop the screwworm threat. State leaders weigh the best path forward, while one company offers an alternative approach. State and federal efforts continue to ramp up in Texas to stop the spread of the New World screwworm. The parasitic fly can impact warm-blooded creatures like cattle and pets. On Thursday, Texas lawmakers listened to different ideas on how to protect animals and defeat the fly. As the federal government races to speed up sterile fly production, one man is making the case that his company can do it faster and cheaper.
The purpose of this hearing is to get answers, to understand what actions are currently being taken, evaluate the viability of any additional solutions.
In a packed room of the House Agriculture Committee, lawmakers and stakeholders discussed the biggest threat facing Texas agriculture, the screwworm. The best chance to defeat the parasitic fly is to disrupt its breeding cycle through producing and releasing sterile flies. But the state will need a lot of them. Experts say about 500 million a week, and ramping up production will take time.
I think that what is best to do is to hedge your bets and to enable multiple pathways to pursue this outcome.
Nathan Moses Gonzalez is the CEO of M3 Agriculture Technologies, a company that specializes in insect sterilization. He's pitching the Texas government on a $60 million project that he says can produce 100 million sterile flies in just a year, using these modular X-ray units. Current sterilization efforts use gamma ray radiation in fixed locations. Moses Gonzalez believes his solution would be just as effective.
We're going to need a lot of distributed capacity throughout Texas and other states, as well as in Mexico and beyond, to ensure that once we push this insect south, we have the technology and capacity to continue that march to the equator and hopefully beyond.
But the U.S. Department of Agriculture pushed back on the use of X-rays in the hearing, saying the science does not prove to be as effective.
The problem is the research with X-ray as a sterilization method. I can't tell you that all of them will be sterile.
Moses Gonzalez said he planned to meet with the governor's office Thursday afternoon to pitch his idea.
We're hoping the outcomes of today's legislative session is that we can see some coordination, not only with M3 in the state of Texas, but also with M3 and the USDA.
Meanwhile, Texas researchers are getting a major boost in the fight against the screwworm. The governor's office says the U.S. Department of Agriculture is awarding around $105 million for 40 projects across the country. Several of those are at Texas universities. The funding will support new ways to track, control, and eliminate the parasite, including drones and improved trapping technology. Well, thank you again for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Dylan McKim. We'll be back next week to bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics.